Hey guys, I wanted to share a neat story with everybody today. I met somebody who knew Kurt Cobain, who was actually a friend of his for a while. And I didn't know if I could believe him at first, but I later found something that pretty much proved he was telling the truth. And he did tell me a funny story about Kurt that I've never heard or read anywhere before that I also wanted to share. But this was back in 2009, so it was totally like 14 years ago. This is back when I used to smoke cigarettes. Thankfully, I kicked that habit a while ago. I've lived in a couple different states, and this is when I was living in Arizona. And this is where I crossed paths with this guy. He was from Yuma, but we ended up crossing paths in a different city in Arizona. And I was smoking a cigarette outside, and he came up to me and asked me for one. So I gave him one, and he appreciated the gesture. And instead of just taking the cigarette and walking away, he hung out with me, and we smoked cigarettes together, and we were socializing as kind strangers. And during the conversation we were having, I noticed he had a music tattoo on the side of his neck. So the conversation turned to music. I started talking about my favorite bands, and of course I said Nirvana as one of them. I've been a fan of Nirvana my whole life, still am. Still listen to their music. And he says, I knew Kurt Cobain. And I was like, oh, really? Like, you got to meet him? And he's like, no, like, I was actually friends with him. We hung out for a while. He said he used to live in Washington where Kurt did. And I was just like, huh. And I didn't know right away if I could believe what he was telling me. I just met this guy. Sometimes people will tell elaborate stories just to seem cooler or to try to make friends or whatever. I didn't want to be young and naive and just believe what I was hearing, but I didn't want to be a jerk and say, no, you didn't. So I kind of was just like, oh, okay. I decided to ask him a couple questions to see what his answer would be. And of course I started with, I'm sure you heard the conspiracy that Courtney had something to do with his death. What do you think of that? And he's like, oh yeah, she definitely did. He told me that she actually had a restraining order out on him because apparently after Kurt died, he was making a lot of noise about it. Like, oh, I know you had something to do with this and blah, blah, blah. And he said she felt compelled to get a restraining order against him because of it. I was just like, oh, wow. And I started asking him about other people's names that had something to do with that too, like the nanny and Alan Wrench. And he's like, oh yeah, Alan Wrench. He's on the FBI's list. Oh, he's going to get what's coming to him. I was just like, oh, damn, okay. Man, this guy, he's really serious and passionate about this. So at this point, I was still like, he's either just like a really hardcore, passionate fan, or he might actually be telling the truth. So then my next question I asked him was about, I said, do you remember or did Kurt tell you about or did you hear any rare songs that have never been released or like leaked online or anything like that? He's like, actually, I have an entire cassette that Kurt recorded and gave directly to me. And it's got stuff on there that nobody or the internet has ever heard. And I was just like, wow, really? And he's like, yeah, I can send it to you if you want. And I was taken back by this. But it sounded like a very genuine offer. And I was like, okay, sure. And he didn't have a phone number to give me. He didn't have a phone. Like, I don't know if he just didn't pay his bill. I don't know what the situation with that was. But he had me take his name and address, like his full name. And he's like, what I want you to do is when you get home, write a letter to that address, remind me who you are, and I will mail you that cassette. And I was just like, holy shit, dude, thanks. Like, I want to hold on to this. And before we parted ways, because of course by now our cigarettes were out, I wanted to ask him one more question about Kurt. And I was like, do you have is there like a funny memory or something that you can share with Kurt that nobody's ever heard before? And he's like, okay, yeah. He's like, I remember something. He said, Kurt had got inspired to write a song called Roll of Dimes. And the meaning behind that, according to this guy, by the way, the guy's name was Jason. I won't say his full name for privacy reasons, but his name was Jason. His last name started with a C. And Jason told me that Kurt and some buddies of his, I don't remember if Jason was part of the group or if it was just other friends he was telling me about. I don't remember that detail of the story he told me. But he said they were scrounging up change for fast food, and I think they went to the bank because they didn't want to like pay with this handful of change at the counter. And I guess the bank gave them like those $5 rolls of dimes. Apparently that's all they had or something. And Kurt went to Burger King and ordered fast food and paid with rolls of dimes. And the person working the counter was apparently not amused. But of course Kurt was, because that's funny as hell if you ask me. And Jason said it inspired him to write this goofy song about rolls of dimes and buying food with rolls of dimes. And would that song be on this rare cassette demo that Jason told me he had and was going to send to me? I don't know, because I kind of screwed up. I ended up losing the information he gave me. I remembered his name, but not his address. But since I didn't have the address, I was just like, oh man, damn it. Whatever. He may not have been telling the truth anyways. And even if he was, why would he just send me that cassette? But I got curious about it. Like a couple years down the road, I was listening to Nirvana and I remembered that encounter with Jason. So I went online and I still remembered his name. First name, middle initial, last name, where he was from in Yuma, and I typed that in and I found him on like public record search. And I was like, there he is, Yuma, Arizona. It had like his birth year on there. And as I was scrolling down, this is what really just made the hair on my neck stand up. It had former and current addresses for him. And it showed in the 90s that Jason lived not only in Washington, but he lived in Tacoma and Lakeview. Tacoma is where Nirvana's bass player lived, that Kurt would travel to. They practiced together. They played shows there. That is the area that Kurt lived and was playing music at. And in the 90s, that's when Kurt was there. And this guy was there. And Jason was born in 75 and Kurt was born in 67. So I mean, Jason's like almost 8 years younger than Kurt, but I mean, that's not unusual. I've had friends of different ages my whole life. But just the fact that, oh my God, like this guy was probably telling the truth, and had I followed through on his kind offer, he may have sent me this rare cassette demo that Kurt Cobain himself recorded and handed to him. And that would have been so cool. I mean, Jason was kind of a shy and like really humble guy to me. And he was genuinely touched by my act of kindness, just sharing a cigarette and a conversation with a stranger. And he sounded very genuine in wanting me to send that tape to me. But I screwed up. I lost this information. I didn't follow through, and I never got it. But now that I filmed this video, I'm wondering if I should try to reach out to him by his recent address and see if he remembers me and just see what happens, because that's just really wild to me. Like, he actually knew Kurt Cobain. And he had a really cool story to share, and now I got to share it with you guys. Remember, Kurt Cobain, roll of dimes. So Jason, if you are out there watching this, or if somebody who knew Jason is out there watching this, send me an email at thenodealhero@gmail.com with your last name. I'll know you're telling the truth if your last name is in there, because I remember it. And let's get to the bottom of this, man. Let's see if that cassette tape is really out there. Rock on. But thank you so much for hearing my story. Still a big Kurt Cobain and Nirvana fan, as I'm sure you are if you're watching this. And Jason, if you're out there, thank you for your kind offer either way. I appreciate you, and rock on wherever you're at now.